Good morning. A call to order our regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is October 27th, 2016. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee. Today we have council members Reich, Goodman, and Warsami. We are a quorum of this committee. We have 3 items on today's agenda. One is a public hearing, which we'll return to after the consent items. So I'll move to consent, which item number 2 is passage of an ordinance amending our Heritage Preservation Commission membership ordinance. I'll just note that this is to make the regulations more like the ones that we have for our other boards and commissions. Item number 3 is passage of an ordinance amending our zoning code related to floodplain regulations and maps consistent with the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program. I'll move up items 2 and 3, see if there's any discussion. I will just note on item 3, we had quite a lot of public testimony at the Planning Commission. Many properties are being taken out of the National Flood Insurance Program and others are being added, and our staff is working closely with the property owners who've had concerns about what it means to be inside that floodplain area. So with that, all in favor of items 2 and 3, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Item number 1 is a certificate of appropriateness appeal for 419 Washington Avenue North. We'll start with staff. I'll note that this is the first step in the process that this project would then go back through the Planning Commission for its land use approvals.
Good morning, Chair Bender, members of the committee. Before you today is an appeal of the Heritage Preservation Commission's approval of a certificate of appropriateness application at 419 Washington Avenue North. The appellant in this case is a neighbor. Background on the property: it's an irregularly shaped parcel which consists of 2 combined lots over a vacated alley. It's located in the Warehouse Historic District. There is an existing building at 411 Washington. It's an office building which is called the Internet Exchange Building, and that was constructed in 1914. And then closer to the intersection of 5th Avenue North and 3rd Street North, there is a surface parking lot. This was the former site of the Haywood Paper Manufacturing Company. That building was demolished in 1967, and the lot has been a surface parking lot since that time. Here's an aerial photo of the site showing the large surface parking lot and the existing building that faces Washington. The application that has been appealed is the HPC's approval of a certificate of appropriateness for the construction of a new building on that surface parking lot portion of the site and the construction of a connection from between the new building and the existing building that fronts on Washington. Just a few historic photos. This photo is taken from the 3rd Street Viaduct looking towards the site. The 3rd Street Viaduct has since been demolished, and 3rd Street North is a dead-end street in this location. And you can see that Haywood Manufacturing Building in the photo on the right. This is a historic aerial photo from 1938, where you can see the 2 buildings on the site. I would also note that you can see that there was a rail spur that came from the rail yards down what is now the alley between Washington Avenue North and 3rd Street North. And then looking at this fire insurance map, you can also see those 2 buildings on the site. And I would also note from in this image, you can see that there was a bridge connecting or some sort of a connection between the Haywood Manufacturing Building and the building at the corner of Washington and 5th Avenue. Here's a current aerial photo of how the site looks today. And then moving on to the current proposal. This is the elevation of the proposed office building that would face 5th Avenue North. Here you can also see the proposed connection to that existing building, the Internet Exchange Building on Washington. This is where there would be, the 5th Avenue side is where there would be retail and restaurant uses, as well as the main pedestrian entrance to the offices. This is the elevation that would face 3rd Street North. This is the elevation that would face the rail yards, and then finally the elevation that would face the alley. And then there you can see the connection as well. To look at the proposal in section, you can see that there's 8 levels of parking proposed, 2 of which are entirely underground, as well as 7 levels of office space above that. And then the HPC, so on September 27th, the HPC voted to approve the certificate of appropriateness subject to several conditions. They actually struck several of the conditions of approval that had been recommended by staff, including one that was related to the design of the recessed entry on 5th Avenue North, another condition of approval that had been recommended was related to the windows on 3rd Street North. And then they also struck a condition of approval that staff had recommended that the above grade parking that was proposed should be lined with active uses. Since they struck that condition of approval, they also added another condition of approval related to the design of that above grade parking, specific design elements that would minimize the impact of the parking that's above grade. The appeal is generally, the concern appears to generally be related to the height and scale of the proposal. Here you can see a rendering of the proposed building in its surrounding context. The Warehouse District Design Guidelines were adopted in 2010, and we have specific guidelines related to scale. These are the scale guidelines that would apply to this particular site. So the guidelines state that the height of the building of a new building should be between 2 and 10 stories. And then there's specific guidelines about floor heights. So just to give a little context on that guideline, the Warehouse Historic District is split into several sub-areas based on the different characters, or the different character of the certain areas within the district based on when most of the buildings were built. So this property is located, as I said, in the 20th century sub-area of the district where historically buildings were between 4 and 10 stories tall. So the guidelines allow for 2 to 10 stories for new construction. In the 19th century warehouse, the guidelines call for new buildings to be between 2 and 6 stories. And then in the smaller rail yard section, the guidelines actually allow up to 20 stories for new construction. There has been some confusion about the height of this building, so I did want to explain that. So as you can see from the diagram, that from the exterior of the building appears to be 10 stories. However, when you look at it in section, and if you were to use the specific zoning code definitions of height and stories, the building would be 15 stories, 13 of which would be in the main structure, and then 2 additional stories on the rooftop. The building is located in the B4N downtown neighborhood district, where the maximum height is 10 stories or 140 feet, whichever is less. And you can also see in the diagram where the proposal would be exceeding both of those requirements. I would note that if the proposal is approved at this height, they do have the next step to, as Councilmember Bender noted, to go to the Planning Commission, and they would need to request a conditional use permit to increase the maximum height of the building. So just to summarize the staff analysis of that particular guideline, part of analyzing the certificate of appropriateness applications is making the finding that the alterations are consistent with the applicable design guidelines that have been adopted by the HPC. So staff took into consideration that the design guidelines do not specify an explicit rule of measurement for stories, and they do not explicitly give a maximum height for buildings in terms of feet. And since the building is designed to appear as if it is 10 stories from the exterior, not including the rooftop structures, staff found that that met the intent of the guidelines. We also noted that because of the above grade parking having shorter floor plates, and then the retail level of the building having taller floor plates, the overall floor heights evened out to generally meeting the intent of the guidelines. Several public comments have been received, mostly noting concern about the height and the scale of the proposed building, and you have received all of those in your packets. And I'll just conclude there and leave up the HPC's action and then take any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Okay, so I will go ahead and open the public hearing. I'll note that we have in our packets the full transcript from the HPC hearings as well. So why don't we start with the applicant, the project team. Come on up. And then we'll have the appellant speak.
Good morning, committee members. I'm Carol Lansing, representing the developer, North Loop Partners. They also own this property. I work at Bakery Baker Daniels. I'm an attorney, 90 South 7th Street. And I will let the AV people know that Low Tech Me is using the overhead projector. Thank you very much. I handed out, because I wasn't sure if it was in your packets, the letters of support from the North Loop Neighborhood Association. The project team met with them twice, in May and again in August, after there'd been some project changes, and went through the project in detail, and both times they issued letters of support. As Lisa noted, the primary concerns in the appeal seem to relate to the height of the building. And she went through that in great detail, kind of said most of what I hoped to say, that it does meet the intent of the guidelines because it appears as a 10-story building. Careful attention was paid to that to mask those parking floors so it will not look like a parking ramp, and to have the design look like 10 stories. And she said it's by zoning 15 stories, and look, that's 13 floors, including the compressed parking floors, and then the height of the penthouses. I think what I can add to what she explained is that this compares favorably with the Ford Center, which is a historic 10-story building down Fifth Street. So this shows buildings along Fifth Avenue, I'm sorry. This is the proposed project. This is the Ford Center. And the Ford Center is, like I said, 10 stories. It's actually 4 feet taller if you compare parapet to parapet height. And then both of them have mechanicals that extend above it. So we also believe it's consistent with the scale of the warehouse district, which has a variety of building heights. This shows surrounding uses. And I just want to point out that this is the project site. It's separated by an alley and streets and the railroad corridor from other buildings. It's not next to any residential buildings. It does not block important views, and it has good, its height does not create any issues related to access to light, air, and those other concerns that people want to pay attention to with the height of a building. Let's see. Then they also, in the appeal, mentioned some questions about the Skyway. This Skyway connection is an important part of the project because it provides accessibility, an accessible route into the Internet Exchange building, which currently does not have ADA accessibility. And the parking in this building, part of it will serve the Internet Exchange building. It's being built on a surface parking lot that currently serves Internet Exchange. They are on the same tax parcel. It isn't particularly visible. It'll be screened by buildings, and it is set back from the public street. So that too will not cause any problems with view or shadowing. It will have minimal impacts on the historic building. It's not going to be it's considered an addition to the historic building. It's not on the front facade or a character-defining facade, and the staff looked at the care that will be used to attach it and felt that it met those guidelines also for that minor addition. There is also historic precedent for a Skyway there. This is the building that used to be on the project site. This is the Skyway that used to exist there. I'm not sure if I have this lined up right. I don't. If you look at it this way, this is Washington, this is the rail corridor, this is the Internet Exchange, and that's the historic Skyway. Let's see. There was not much else that was expressed in the appeal for us to respond to. If you have questions, the project team is here. Any questions about the design? We do urge you to deny the appeal. This is going to be replacing a surface parking lot with a great brick building, filling in the urban fabric of a historic district in an appropriate way, bringing over 200,000 square feet of new modern office space to an area that's getting pretty hot for new office users.
Thank you. We do have a question from Councilmember Goodman.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Lansing, what was the height of the building that was there historically prior to this new construction?
I don't know. It's been a surface parking lot for some time, and I don't know the height of the building it's replacing. I believe it was not 10 stories. I believe it was shorter.
It looks like staff may know that answer. Are there any other questions for Ms. Lansing?
I'm just wondering, well, I want to hear from staff first.
It appears, there's only one historic photo, but it appears to have been a 4-story building.
I'm interested in how you actually make the case that 10 stories is consistent with the surrounding properties, because it's not. I mean, your own photos show that it's not. And wanting something bigger doesn't mean it's consistent with the surrounding character of the buildings. Ford Center, I don't think is a fair comparison, although I'll use it as a comparison. It's existing. It was there over history.
Mhm.
This is new construction. So within new construction, you have the ability to abide by the code under B4N. And I have a lot of B4N in my ward. And quite frankly, I'd be telling developers in my ward, build to what the code allows. Don't look for any exception you can have because we don't have enough parking in the neighborhood and we want to have more parking. And that has been the tone and tenor of the comments from North Loop since I've read their documents. They're happy about it because they want parking.
Mhm.
Yippee, I'm glad they want parking. But the bottom line is there's no reason to vary, in my opinion, from the code because 10 stories, 140 feet is generous already in a historic district where everything else is like 4, 5, 6 stories.
Mhm.
So what is your response to this is consistent with the character of the existing neighborhood?
Well, we are looking at the guidelines, which looked at the character of the 20th century warehouse district and concluded that buildings from 2 to 10 stories are consistent with the character of that area. So I did, this is 10 stories, or appears to be 10 stories, and we're working with the historic district guidelines, which don't establish a limit in terms of feet. That is an issue that, a CUP will have to be approved for that for the zoning. But looking at what we're given in the guidelines as character of the historic district, you don't have to look at just the immediately surrounding buildings. You look at the district as a whole, and the guideline is.
What are
for
some
10
of the
stories.
other buildings that are 10 stories?
I would say they're more on the other side of the rail yard. This is kind of closer to downtown than the warehouse district extends, further up Washington. I know there's 7 and 8 story buildings on Washington.
Just tell me what other.
I think I'm going to say it wrong. The Wyman building on the other side of the rail track, I think might be.
So
I didn't do a survey. I cannot give you.
But you guys are making an argument that you should go to 10 stories because that's consistent with the character, yet you can only come up with 2 buildings in the entire district that are 10 stories? I don't think it's a very good case. I represented this area for 10 years, and we didn't approve buildings at 10 stories. And the developer actually built a number of projects in my ward during that time, and many developers did, and none of them were at this height.
Well, it's a longer-term construction style with the concrete. You can go higher. A lot of the buildings that have been built in the district are 6 stories because they were using just the stick frame construction style. It wasn't, and they were part of the district, if you're going first, that was more residential and lower scale.
Could I actually ask, I don't want to get too much into the land use applications, but there was a lot of discussion about the parking at the HPC, and just maybe following up, could you talk about the parking? I believe this project will need a conditional use permit for district parking as part of its land use application. So just talk about how much parking there is, how much is serving the principal use versus district parking. And I'd be interested in understanding how that's driving the design of the building, or sort of how that goes in terms of the height.
There's 2 areas of parking. One is below grade and one is above. The above grade parking will serve the uses on site, which include the Internet Exchange building. And there will be, I think, approximately 275 parking spaces in the above grade. We have not had this discussion with staff yet, but I believe that that's less than the maximum for accessory parking when you look at the new office, the existing uses, Internet Exchange, and the retail restaurant areas. Below grade for public, there'll be about 205 spaces. And that is, there's no other public parking in close proximity that will serve other office users in the area, other residents, and anybody really from the public that wants to come in.
And can you just say how many stories of above ground parking there are?
We have
it is in here, but I just wanted to make sure that we are clear. And then I know that the appellants are also ready to speak. I just want to note that that's next on the
this is one section of the above grade because of the angles. There's 4 to 5. If you count it back here, this is along the rail corridor, 5 levels. Here there's 4. They are short floors, so that's compressed. They are flat plates, so they are convertible if they'll be built with flat plates, and it would be possible if the parking isn't needed and things change in the future to convert that to office space. Looking at the section from 5th, it appears more like 3 levels.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for the applicant? There are none. So we will then turn to the folks who've appealed the project. I know you have materials prepared for us.
I actually do have a question. She said that there's...
Are you going to speak on behalf of the
Yeah.
appeal?
Yeah.
Okay. Could you then please state your name and address for the record? Do you need us to get this put up on the computer?
I think I have it up already.
Maybe staff can help get set up, and then we
Yeah.
can proceed with your testimony. And if you do have any questions, you can note them as you go, and we can have staff respond. Or
Okay.
How-
My name is Jared Bromley. I filed this appeal, and I live at 618 Washington Avenue. I do have one question. She said that there's not any parking around the area of this building. Well, there is one parking ramp right next to this building, and then there is also parking all along the 4th Street ramp. So I don't know if that's a true statement. So how did this appeal all come about? After reading an article online by the Star Tribune, I noticed the sheer size of this building and was worried about the historical integrity of the North Loop being compromised for parking. I called my city councilman, Jacob Fry, in Ward 3. He basically told me that it does fit historic guidelines and there's not much we can do. I requested information on the building that he said his assistant would email me, which I never received. So I went on my own to figure out how to file this appeal. That's when I got in touch with Lisa Steiner. The purpose of my appeal is not to stop this project. No one wants this project more than me. I love the North Loop. I met my wife in the North Loop. I got engaged in the North Loop. I got married in the North Loop. We're planning on having a baby in the North Loop. We are the North Loop resident families. What I want to do is find middle ground to follow our historic guidelines. The Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission should not have approved this project. It clearly does not fit the historic guidelines. The HPC is supposed to help preserve the community's unique identity, culture, and character by protecting significant historic resources from the city's past. This is why we have all these resources. We have a warehouse historic guideline. We have the HPC. The CPED staff report states the building is designed to appear as a 10-story from the exterior, though it also includes several additional shorter levels of above-grade parking. Per the zoning code definition of height and stories, the building would be at least 13-story building, including the rooftop mechanical and elevator overruns. I have a little drawing up there where it shows 1 through 14. So let's go to the historic guidelines. Section 325, height of a building shall be between 2 and 10 stories. Once again, 2 and 10 stories. Not a 13-story building, not a 160-foot building as a 13-story building. Not a 13-story plus mechanical rooftop. Not a 14-story due to a grade change. These rules are pretty clear to me. 10 stories. So why is adding more floors an issue? Well, this is not the last building that will be built in the North Loop, and it will set a dangerous precedence. Are we going to allow bending the rules on all projects? Moving forward, are we going to allow 14-story buildings plus mechanical with 10-foot floor plates, breaking our historic guidelines? Increasing the neighbor's density? And increasing the traffic issues on Washington Avenue. Ever since we've made that a 2-lane road, traffic going in the city has been just ridiculous. You can't even take a left out of certain driveways or roads. Okay, here's my next reasoning here. So the city of Minneapolis does not have a minimum on parking, but they do have a maximum. The maximum for this parking is 328 parking stalls. And the one thing that can worry me is the floor plates in this building were made to be flat floor plates, which is a good thing if we need to use them in the future. But who's to say Google doesn't come here or Amazon wants more space and they come to the developer and say, hey, you have 9.5-foot floor plates with city views. Why do you have parking there? Why don't we have more office space? So then we fill up 60,000 square feet of office space, losing that parking and right back to the same issue. Historic Guideline 326. The first floor height shall be between 14 and 21 stories, and the upper story height between 10 and 14. The main thing I want to point out here is not 8 stories of 9.5 feet floors. We need the North Loop Planning and Zoning Committee and the HPC to push back on developers to keep our building heights to scale. If a developer wants a 10-story building, that's fine. We just have to suggest shorter floor plates. We know that these developers always try to push the max and variances on everything. So we'll go back to the historic guidelines on page 29. Section 3.27, consider the footprints of the adjacent buildings along the block face to develop a design for a new building that is compatible with the scale of its surrounding buildings. Here's an image from DJR's plan. Here are 8 surrounding buildings. Not one of them is 10 stories. And the floor plate is larger than all of these. One interesting thing I did notice at the HPC committee meeting was DJR's plans. If you look here, the image on the left shows the historic warehouse district buildings, 19th century and 20th century. The dark gray part is the 19th century. The light gray, the 20th century. In the plan to the right by DJR, it shows the blue as the 20th century and the yellow as the 19th century. The map is wrong and misleading to the HPC. Are they trying to justify their enormous buildings for making it look like their neighbors are 19th century warehouses? Here's a vicinity plan that I made from DJR's proposal. I highlighted the streets in yellow and took the buildings and made their floor stories in red so you can read them easier. There's 9 zones in this vicinity. I'm going to go by and name the tallest buildings in the zone. Bookman Stacks, 8 stories. Vicinity 2, 530 North, 4 stories. Vicinity 3, Duffy Paper, 7 stories. Vicinity 4, Designer Guild Building, 6 stories. Vicinity 5, this is where 419 is located. Internet Exchange is 4 stories. Vicinity 6, Security Warehouse, or 5th Avenue Loft, 7 stories. A parking ramp of 7 stories. Dock Street Flats at 5 stories. And the Hewing Hotel at 5 stories. So how many buildings were on all these lists? We had 30 surrounding buildings. 0 buildings were 10 stories. 0 buildings were 140 feet. Do you know what building were not on the DJR's vicinity map? One of them was L3, which I do love that building. 7 stories though. The main one I want to bring up, the Ford Center. Why is this not on the map? It's not one of the surrounding buildings that received notice of the public hearing. It's not even on DJR's plans. It's on the cover. Or their vicinity report. Surrounding buildings, it's not even in the general area. Where is the Ford Center? Tucked away on the very edge of the historic district. Blocked by the huge 4th Street exit ramp. Also blocked by a garbage incinerator. And the Twin Stadium. Also blocked by the hideous Be the Madge building. 419 project is in the heart of the North Loop. It cannot be compared to the Ford Center. It needs to be to scale with the surrounding buildings. Here's another picture of the surrounding buildings by DJR. We need to make this right. We need to have this building to scale. I want to see this building built, but I want it done within reason. Thank you for all your time.
Thank you. Excellent appeal presentation. All right. Would anyone else like to speak from the public? Give anyone a chance? Sure. Come on up. Please state your name and address for the record.
Anna Gillette, 401 North 2nd Street. Even though my address is 2nd Street, I actually front Washington. I'm on the other side of the building, and I actually will be looking directly at this project. I spoke at length at the earlier Heritage Preservation meeting, so if that's all in there, I don't really need to go back in there. I also submitted an email because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to make it today, so I'm not going to touch on all the points that he just made, and I completely agree with you. Thank you for doing this, and there are many of us who feel this way in the neighborhood. The one thing I did want to bring up, which is irritating to me, and I've been talking to the North Loop Neighborhood Association about this, I want you to take their point of view with a grain of salt, because I consider myself someone very on top of things in the neighborhood. I've lived here 12 years. You know that I pay attention. I'm on their email list for agendas. I go to meetings as I can. They send out agendas that don't include development on the agendas. So many of us miss that this was even coming down the pipe. So they have been hearing from certain constituents, businesses who want parking for their employees. However, all the residents, you know, many of us don't want more parking. We don't want to deal with more traffic. We don't want to deal with more emissions. And we live here all day long. We're not just coming into work and leaving. We're actually here. And so I just want you to take that into consideration. I've actually asked them to start putting actual development addresses on their agendas so that those of us who care can actually start coming, because we can't go to every single meeting. Nobody really can. That's what the representation is for. However, I, for one, and I know many others, if they had seen that address pop up on an agenda, would have made a point to be there. And I've been very clear with some of the leaders on that organization that I don't feel well represented by them at all. on this topic, and it's not just 419. There's another project coming up further up Washington. It's the same issue. So anyway, totally agree. This is out of scale with the character of the neighborhood, the livability issues, people being able to have sky, light, and it's not just, you know, people who live there. It's also just pedestrians, the pedestrian experience there. It's just going to completely alter it, and it is going to set a precedent once a 10-story goes up. I mean, even 8 stories is cutting close as far as I'm concerned, when everything else, as you know, has come in at 6, 7. I mean, we could just, you've named a list of them. I mean, Whole Foods, T3, they mentioned there's nobody living next to this building. That's just not true. We've got Security Warehouse, we've got Fifth Avenue Lofts that are going to be directly impacted by this. Not to mention, right across the railroad tracks are the Dock Street Flats buildings are right there. I mean, how much closer can you be? I guess that's it. I just wanted to make sure to make those additional points. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sure.
Hi. My name's Zach Stoffren. I also live at 401 North 2nd Street. I do face Washington, so this would directly impact my view, and I feel overshadow our whole side of the building. I want to thank Jarrett for doing this. I completely agree with this point. And also just reiterate that the North Loop Association, I'm sure they send this out. I'm not actively involved. I have spent 4 years in the neighborhood, just became a new owner in the neighborhood. I'm sure they represent some views, but they certainly don't represent mine, and I believe many other residents. I'd also like to thank Lisa. Until she sent this letter to our building, I had no idea the project. I understand that's equally my fault. But I came here today mostly sickened by the fact of the amount of parking and the argument for the parking. As many of us here that are arguing this live in the neighborhood. I walk that neighborhood every night. I don't know if some of the other people can vouch for that statement. I do not see the scramble and the mad dash on 99% of the nights for people to try to find parking. In fact, the 4th Street, as we're calling it, ramp, and many others, I find empty. And for our building to be overshadowed by this, and I think he's already pointed out many of the great ideas about how we're stretching the height of this, but for me, I can just imagine walking by this building every night, seeing multi-levels empty, and to know our view was blocked by that personally will make me sick to my stomach. I don't know the calculations, the differences in what is required for the potential office space, and I get all of that as valid. I too want to see this project. I love every new restaurant that comes in the neighborhood, every new office space. I love how it's growing. I think it positively impacts us all in the neighborhood, but I see no reason why it can't be 6 stories, as I know that can get one additional level being subset in that parking lot and be equal height to the Internet Exchange building that's next to it and equal to all the ones around it. We brought up the Ford Center and many other buildings, I think even down on 7th Avenue, and I just don't see how it compares, because this is directly around other buildings that are 4 or 5 stories, and also bring up the fact it is at the entry point of the North Loop, and it is going to impact everything north of there. So it is not just about everything surrounding it, it's going to impact everything behind it. And that is also my biggest concern with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Sure.
Hi, my name is Jackie Noble. I live at 618 North Washington. I live in Jarrett's building. I have a question. Was there a feasibility study done on what kind of percentage increase we're going to see in traffic? I know in Washington we just have 2 single lanes with a middle lane for turning and then turning onto 5th. Does anyone know if one was done?
I don't believe this project requires a TPM, Transportation Management Plan, TMP. So
would that be something that we can ask for before we're including 481 parking spaces, which is over what the limit is?
Your point is well taken, but
Okay.
we have rules about which kinds of projects and size of projects that require that kind of study, and this one does not.
It does not. Okay. I would just say that's a concern then. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Would the project team like to respond to anything that was included in the testimony? Usually give that option at the end. I had to go first.
Just to the traffic, I do believe that a traffic demand management plan is being prepared. Is that correct? And it will be evaluated as part of the Planning Commission applications.
Thank you. I stand corrected. Okay. If I may, then I'll close the public hearing. I did want to ask staff to come back up and because I did see in the HBC transcript some discussion of the height. So just to note, the HPC did find that this met the criteria for certificate of appropriateness, and it seems like they based their decision about the height on the fact that this was the appearance of a 10-story building, and the guidelines call for buildings that are between 2 and 10 stories to fit within the guidelines. So could you just talk us through how you came to arrive at the conclusion of your staff recommendation and why the HPC agreed? And I do know that there were a number of conditions of approval put on the certificate of appropriateness that may relate to that.
Sure, Councilmember Bender. So in the staff report, when we were analyzing the applicable guidelines related to scale, we noted the differences in floor plates and how they averaged out to generally meeting the intent of the guidelines, and that the appearance from the exterior is that the building, as in the diagram that I had showed in my presentation, is that it would appear to be a 10-story building, although by using the zoning code definition, it would not be a 10-story building. We also, in the staff analysis, had noted that we were recommending a condition of approval that all of that parking be lined with an active use, and that with that active use lining the parking, that especially met the intent of the guideline. However, the Heritage Preservation Commission struck that condition of approval for the active use. So I
just want to make sure everyone heard that. So staff had recommended that the entire building, the entire facade be lined with an active use, and that was not included in the HBC's recommendation.
Correct. There was a recommended condition of approval that all of that above grade parking, because there is a guideline that requires that there shall not be any parking along a principal facade of a building. So staff had recommended that that parking be lined with an active use like an office, and that played into the analysis for the height and scale.
And that was condition 5?
Yeah, I think. I don't have the numbers on there, but it was, so the guideline is 3.14 that says that off-street parking shouldn't be located along a principal facade, so that's how we had recommended it be lined.
Okay. And then just one last time, could you remind us how the zoning code defines 10 stories versus the height of this building?
Absolutely. So this diagram helps to explain it. So the zoning code defines stories essentially as between the floor and the floor above, or any portion of the building that goes over 14 feet would be more than 1 story. So that's why the rooftop mechanical, which is 20 feet, counts as 2 stories. And then all of those levels of parking count as a story per the zoning code definition.
So does the zoning code give us a total height that is 10 stories?
It doesn't. So zoning code regulates height through both height and stories. Right. So it's 10 stories or 140 feet, whichever is less. And so that's where you can see in the diagram where 10 stories on this building would be and where 140 feet would be. And then, so it's exceeding in both circumstances.
But you're saying in the staff report that these numbers 1 through 10 are not typical story heights.
Correct. So the parking, above grade parking levels are much shorter than a typical floor plate. So when you're looking in section, it clearly meets 15 stories. However, when you're looking in elevation, it would appear to be a 10-story building. However, I would note that it is, from the exterior, still the same amount of feet, but 10 stories. It appears as 10 stories.
Okay. But one could imagine us using the 140 feet as another measure of whether or not it fit within at least how the zoning code might define 10 stories.
Correct. And 140 feet, the guideline that talks about the different floor heights says that the first floor should be between 14 and 21, and then the upper floor should be between 10 and 14. So I think if you max out each of those, the total height of a 10-story building would be 147 feet.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Could you repeat that last measurement?
Yes. So the zoning or the warehouse district design guidelines say that the ground floor of a building should be between 14 and 21 feet, and then the upper story should be between 10 and 14 feet. And so if you use the 21-foot tall first floor and then 14 feet upper floors, I believe if I did my math correctly, the maximum height would be 147 feet. And this building is 168 feet tall, including the rooftop. So it would be 148 feet, excluding the rooftop.
148 feet, excluding the rooftop,
mechanical
equipment. Okay. Are there any other questions for staff? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So how tall is it without excluding the rooftop?
It would be 148 feet.
And the zoning allows for?
140 feet.
Okay.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, I didn't get my packet till this morning, so I was trying to scramble to get all the information. You don't have to stand there if you don't want to, Ms. Steiner. I understand the height issue pretty well, always have, and I'm going to move to grant the appeal. And I want to speak to that. And I think that Mr. Bromley, who I don't know and have never met, made a very convincing case if there are findings of fact required. I've never seen anyone come in actually and kind of point by point prove the points so eloquently. This building is too tall, and you guys know it because you got up and said you couldn't find another building in any area. The only thing you can find is the Ford building, which isn't even in the sub area that your architects suggest. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the ability to tell them that they have to be a lot less than 140. From where I sit, I think I would say take the average of all the buildings in the sub areas from 4 stories to 8 and average that out, and that would be about consistent with the character of the neighborhood. I don't want to get into what we should do to tell them how tall the building should be at this point. I think that they should go back and talk with the neighborhood. Sounds like the immediate neighbors or the appellants and Councilmember Fry's office to determine kind of where we would be at going forward. But clearly, this building is not in scale with the other buildings in the neighborhood. If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. This building is too tall, and I only know what I heard today and read in the packet this morning, and it seems to me it's way too tall. But I don't know that we can limit it much beyond 140. But that would include the mechanical penthouse too. So, I mean, it could be, the guidelines say between 2 and 10. I think they should have to stick with the consistent character of the neighborhood. I buy that argument. I have a lot of B4N in my ward. I don't want to see buildings of this height and size in my ward where there's a B4N, to be honest. With regard to the parking, I have mixed feelings about it. I can see how bigger businesses like Arctic Cat and others, Select Comfort, that just announced they're moving into downtown yesterday with 900 new jobs without any regional economic agency, by the way, helping them do so. They need parking. I understand it, but I think the appellants make a fairly compelling case that there is parking actually in the neighborhood, and there's a lot of it because the neighborhood has been focused on recruiting residents who are willing to walk or live with 1 car. We've put in a bike lane on Washington. We're trying to get younger millennials to not have 2 cars. So I can understand that. I will leave it to those who have more experience with parking and have more opinions about parking than me to determine what the appropriate amount would be. My issue is height. And for that reason alone, I have moved to grant the appeal.
Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Although I am not on this committee and will not be voting today, I would like to speak to it. So, clearly there are a couple of different conflicting items within our zoning code, one of them dealing with the number of feet, the other one dealing with the number of stories. Our zoning code very clearly allows for 10 stories, and this is more than that. However, our zoning code also allocates a certain number of feet per story, and in this case, it also exceeds it by approximately, 8 feet or so, plus the electric on the top. From a personal standpoint, I don't necessarily consider the electrical at the top to be part of the building. It certainly is minimal, but I can understand how when you need some sort of objective criteria, it's included. A couple other things I just kind of wanted to mention. First off is Mr. Bromley, Mr. Jarrett. Thank you for your comments. You put together a very articulate argument. We did email you back on October 5th. My staff gave you all the information you needed and asked if you need any additional. I'd be happy to forward you the information. We have it. The email was sent on October 5th, but we'll be happy to send it again. So I appreciate your argument. You made it very articulately. Here's the constant compromise and negotiation that's happening in North Loop. And I do have a respect for all sides here. I don't use a car, so parking is not an issue for me. I bike pretty much everywhere. However, I can tell you with 100% certainty that far and away the #1 call that we get from both North Loop residents as well as North Loop businesses is a concern about limited or no parking. That's far and away the #1 call that we get in our office, and so as the representative of the area, I am sympathetic. With this particular building, I appreciate the fact that they're planning ahead for a time when parking and cars, and specifically cars with that are not automated, will no longer be in existence. And so they're able to knock down the ramps and then include office space going forward. I think that is a good addition. I certainly don't want to set a precedent in North Loop to allow for buildings that go beyond what the zoning code allows, and so I would like to sort of figure out where that's going forward. I'm not specifically. I think so. What I'm saying is, I think that there's room for a compromise and a way to find to get to a building that will function.
All right. Any further discussion? Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very good commentary here for guidance for my vote. But I will note that there's certainly some commendable exercise in terms of the look of the building. I mean, there's some buildings that slipped in the North Loop that I'm like, wow, what's historical about that kind of material, or the cheese grater balcony thing. So there's been lots of compromise in terms of the historical character of the historical district, and I think that happens in a growing city. Compromises are made, as Councilmember Frye has pointed out, and I hope that's pursued. I think this building, certainly in size aside, which has been today's debate, really did go out of its way to be a building that, though its scale might be a little different, it certainly looks like it's in the same language of a warehouse, and I sort of applaud that. The issues of parking, that's a local issue. Good luck, Jacob. Have fun with that.
Okay. I mean, I'll note that I think an alternative solution here would have been to deny the appeal with additional conditions that spoke to the height limits, but I'm willing to support the motion as it stands. Just want to make a couple comments. One, I did note as well, Councilmember Reich's comment that the building is clearly designed, within the guidelines, and I think the HPC discussion reflected that. The level of detail that they got into to discuss those historic qualities, I think, demonstrates that about the building. I personally would have supported the staff recommended condition that the active uses wrap the garage, and that would be also something we could have added as part of the Planning Commission reviews. And I would also say that the district parking is a question that would have also come up as part of the CUP discussion. My perspective on that is mixed. I am no fan of parking, as probably everyone in Minneapolis knows. I do think that there are advantages to district parking, though. And there's a project in my ward that was built before I took office that had significant significantly more parking than I think I would want to see in any one building, but that has allowed for additional buildings to come in the surrounding area that use that parking, and then those have had little to no parking, which has really improved the design of those buildings. So I think there's a push and pull there with district parking. I actually think it's something we should probably do more of in Minneapolis. And in here, the design of the parking, I think, is well integrated into the building, particularly with that recommended addition that staff had made. So I would say I think this building is really going in the right direction. The issue with the height seems that most of my colleagues disagree with the HPC's decision. So then I will say, all those in favor, Councilmember Goodman, did you want to make another comment?
Madam Chair, I agree with you with regard to the staff recommendations on wrapping as well, and I would direct staff to reiterate those recommendations as they come forward. Again, I think that has to be fixed. I disagree with the HPC on that issue also. So I want to make sure we're clear that a number of people on the panel also agree with the staff recommendations with regard to the wrapping of the retail around the parking, if they should determine that number of parking spaces should be there. I also concur with Councilmember Reich. I think the building is beautifully designed. I don't think there's any objection. I don't think the neighbors think that, and it's very hard to design a building in a historic district that actually doesn't look fake. I think this one actually looks pretty good.
All right, all those in favor then of granting the appeal on item number 1, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. That concludes our agenda for today. Thank you, everyone. And I need to direct staff. To prepare the findings that supports our motion.
Yeah, I guess I'd ask the appellant to give you the findings.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. That concludes our agenda. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone who came today.